Okay, yeah, guess we'll start. Thanks for being here, everyone. My name is Noah Lone. You might know me kind of under my developer alias, Some Humble Onion. And this is the road to 100K copies, an indie game journey where I'll kind of be going over the development of my game, Smushi Come Home. So for those who don't really know what my game is, just here's a quick run through of the trailer. Hopefully it's not too loud. Yeah, so this is Smushi Come Home. It's a casual 3D exploration game. You play as Smushi, who's this little mushroom, and you're kind of just like running around the forest. You're lost. You're trying to find your way back home. There's a lot of light platforming, light puzzle solving. There's a bunch of different small open worlds. Climbing hooks, things like that. There's a bunch of different characters that you get to meet as well. Different personalities, goofy, quirky little guys. There's also my college journal in the game, which lets you learn about real-life mushrooms as well. And yeah, this is basically a game that I developed mostly solo for about 2 years. So, in this discussion, we'll kind of just go over some of the technical aspects of developing the game. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to talk about everything, so we'll kind of be skipping over audio design, optimization, stuff like that. But we will go over character controller, level design, artwork, other things like that. We'll also go over how the game was marketed and how publishers approached me and just my experiences with that. And lastly, we'll kind of just cover what it was like to ultimately release the game and just the overall reception of that. Before getting into just the overall development, I'll kind of briefly discuss how this all essentially started. So from 2015 to 2020, I studied computer science at Georgia State University. Honestly, during those years, I never really got good at programming, and I was pretty unmotivated in general for just computer science. But it just seemed like the safe field to go into, so I stuck with it. And thankfully, in my last semester of college, I discovered a web programming class. And in this class, we had a final project that could be literally anything we wanted to make. So I decided, let me do something fun and develop a video game. This little video game kind of turned into a huge passion of mine. Not only did the programming just really click for me finally for video games, but I just enjoyed really doing everything on my own, from the artwork to the level design. And I think something just really sparked there, so I felt like I had to run with it. So shortly after I finished this final project, I graduated college in spring of 2020. And as we all know, spring of 2020 is like peak COVID lockdown. I actually had a job lined up kind of in the tech industry, and because of COVID, it completely fell through. And truth be told, I was so happy about that because I just had this new passion that I discovered of game development, and it basically gave me all the time in the world now to focus on it. So I stayed part-time at this job and focused the rest of the year just learning the ins and outs of game development on my own. I started out in the Godot game engine, focusing on only 2D projects and just kind of trying to better my pixel art skills. Later on, I kind of started to lean over towards 3D once I realized just how easy Blender was to pick up. This is a free, for those that don't know, Blender is a free 3D modeling art tool. Super awesome, tons of tutorials out there. And I kind of spent the rest of the year focusing on that, making a transition to the Unity game engine because it seemed better for 3D at the time. And also throughout that period, I kind of worked on some smaller projects that were released for free on itch.io. I feel like it's honestly really best to experiment as much as possible when you're trying something new. So these smaller projects really helped me learn as much as I could and ended up just being the best teacher I could have because they helped me understand where exactly are my skills with game development, and also just taught me a lot of discipline I was going to need when I started working on my bigger projects. So in total, I was about 9 months deep into this huge game dev grind, just learning all these different tools, experimenting, and about halfway through that grind, I made the risky decision that I think most of us want to make, which is I quit my part-time job and just kind of jumped right into game development. I kind of had an idea now of just how much work goes into making a game solo, so I realized I needed to focus all of my attention towards it. And I want to make something very clear. I was in a very fortunate position to just kind of quit my job. To be fully transparent, I had about $10,000 saved up leading into this from just working part-time throughout college. And I also stayed with my family to kind of just minimize my expenses and I basically cut out any other unnecessary expense I needed to make those $10,000 stretch just as long as possible and try to stay full-time game development. And it's kind of full-time because I wasn't really making any money, but I was doing it full-time. Around this period, I also kind of discovered shorter cozy games. Games like Wide Ocean Big Jacket, A Short Hike, and all the Frog Detective games. These had slower pacing, more casual dialogue, and just really fun worlds to explore. And the best thing about it was that all these games were very easily beatable within a short amount of time. I don't know about you guys, but I personally just don't have time to play like an 8-hour, 40-hour campaign. And truthfully, I don't really want to anymore. So I really just kind of discovered these shorter games and fell in love with them. And titles like this really inspired me to kind of make my own shorter cozy game because that's just what I wanted to play, which I think is really important when you make a game. You really need to make something that's not really what the market wants to play, but what you want to play. And at the time, it was a bit of a risk because cozy games were a bit of a smaller genre. They were starting to grow more and more, so in hindsight, I guess it was a good idea that I chose this. But there was a lot less competition in the cozy game genre. This wasn't like Metroidvania or Souls-like where there's just a bunch of them. It was a little bit easier to step into. So now that I was unemployed and insanely passionate, it was basically time to start working on the development of Smushi Come Home. And before I jumped into a blank Unity project and got crazy, I kind of had to establish what this game was exactly. In my mind, I knew I wanted to make a 3D adventure game that was casual. I wanted there to be some platforming and also just a wholesome storyline. And that idea was pretty much derived by these inspirations here. It's very crucial to establish these inspirations early on because they're really going to help you understand your scope and just shape your idea overall. And basically what I did was I looked at these games and other medias and just jotted down what I loved about them most. So for A Short Hike, for those that don't know, it's a very short game. It's in the title. You can beat it in like an hour. And it basically does a really good job at capturing the essence of a beautifully stylized open world, but in the form of a short game. I also took a lot of inspiration from the Pikmin series, which are my all-time favorite games. My game is nothing like Pikmin in terms of gameplay, but I specifically love the setting in these games. You're basically on a much smaller scale. You're like 2 inches. And it does a really good job portraying that scale in the game by the use of objectives and just environment art. There was also Super Mario Sunshine, which is a classic despite its many flaws. This is my favorite 3D platformer of all time, and I specifically love the verticality of the level design. They really emphasized that well using the water jetpack, which was pretty innovative at its time. And lastly, I had to mention Adventure Time, which is a hilarious show, but also gets really deep, and I think a lot of people connect with the show and resonate with it. I was specifically inspired by the writing style of it, and I tried to incorporate that a lot in my game. So basically, with all these inspirations in mind, I just kind of jotted down these core concepts that I would have to stick with throughout the game. That was a wholesome storyline, open worldish exploration, and just easily beatable challenges. I wanted this game to be beatable by basically anyone. And one of the first things that I actually focused on was creating the art style, which is typically not something you usually want to focus on first, but it also just kind of depends on your workflow. And I kind of felt myself more as an artist first than a programmer. So the art style was basically developed using this basic toon shader. I relied on tons of tutorials to learn how to write shaders because it's a very complex topic. And I essentially made a very simplified version of Roystand's toon shader, where most of the models appear unlit, and then there's just like a very sharp, crisp shadow there as well. And then all of the models were hand textured in a pixel art style. So essentially what I would do is model out everything in Blender and then unwrap the UVs. And then I would texture all the UVs through Asprite, which is a pixel art tool. This worked in my favor because I had experience with Asprite, kind of playing around in pixel art games and stuff like that. And it also just allowed me to create simple models with a nice stylized look. This did, however, come with a cost, though, because I was hand texturing every single model. So one way I tried to work around with that is just by reusing assets, but adding some variety to it. Specifically with the foliage, I would actually texture a lot of these completely white. That way, when I would go into the game engine, I had a shader that allowed me to tweak the color property of it. And this basically let me use similar plant models that would take me a while to hand texture, and reuse them in different environments because my levels were basically based on different seasons. So for example, this wildberry plant here, I have it in the spring level and also the fall level, and I didn't have to remodel completely again. I just changed the material color. And to tie together all of the art style, I also incorporated these hand-drawn skyboxes as well. These were not pixel art. I actually drew them in a free digital art tool called Krita. But they really helped emphasize the immersion of the gameplay. It made you really feel like you were actually in this forest and you were this tiny little 2-inch mushroom. And in order to kind of achieve this effect, I incorporated a couple of different visual techniques alongside this. So here we'll look at an example of the first level with no visual effects applied to it. You can see all the way to the back of the level. It kind of makes you feel a little bit enclosed by the terrain, and the skybox is pretty hidden. So one of the first things that I do is I apply a depth of field effect, which is a post-processing effect. Essentially what this does is it blurs out objects in the distance and just brings more focus over to the front. And I kind of think this already makes it look pretty good, but I decided to take it a step further. So next what I do is I apply a huge layer of fog into the background to kind of hide all the elements in the background. And this effect looks very jarring on its own. So to kind of cut this out, what I do is I trim the render distance of the camera. So this hides all the objects off in the distance. It opens up the skybox, and it makes the level feel a little bit more mysterious, and you're not really sure what comes next. And I think there was kind of one other effect that I wanted to apply to this. So if you pay attention to where the fog kind of cuts off the level geometry, it's a bit sharp, and it doesn't really blend with the skybox that well. So one thing I did to do that was I applied a custom effect called Kino Fogged. This is developed by Kaijiro Takahashi, who is a really cool game developer and releases awesome effect tools for free online. And I think this was just a really cool effect. It kind of helped blend the render distance cutoff with the skybox and just make the whole level feel a little bit more cohesive. So just keep in mind that I was like a total beginner at 3D when I started working with this game. I really had to try it the hard way through a lot of trial and error. So I would suggest if you want to make something that's really stylized, just be prepared to commit a ton of time to it. My style was iterated over and over again throughout development, but truthfully, I think the result was well worth it, and it's just something that you have to keep at. So one of the other main components that I worked on was the character controller design. This was going to be a game mostly focused on 3D exploration, so this was something that had to be really satisfying on its own. And it started off pretty rough in the beginning. I was just kind of a random moving around, goofing around, trying to figure out what kind of movement abilities I should really add to the game. And I kind of built this off of a foundation, which is an asset called Character Movement Fundamentals by Janot. This is a totally free asset now on GitHub, and it basically allowed me to kind of hit the ground running by already having a set of scripts that handled a lot of the physics and collision. And basically from there, I could start implementing my own custom movements and kind of just make this tool into something of my own. One of the first movements that I actually implemented was kind of like a glider system. Oops, sorry. So these were basically the glider was going to be really necessary for the gameplay because I was going to have these semi-open world-ish levels, and you had to be able to traverse them really easily. But early on, I kind of realized that this glider ability was like insanely overpowered. Players were able to like reach areas that they shouldn't yet, and they didn't have any upgrades to work towards. So I started studying game design from other games like Breath of the Wild and Genshin Impact, which both had really cool glider mechanics. One thing I noticed was that they both had a stamina system for their glider, but when the stamina ran out, you basically fell to the floor, and it was just really punishing and didn't really fit the tone for my game. So I kind of took that glider stamina system, and what I did was, instead of you falling immediately when the glider runs out, you instead have this slow fall effect. This kind of just gave the player a brief moment to figure out what the next move was, and this way you're kind of just descending slowly and not getting too punished, which goes with more of the casual tone of my game. This also opened up room for upgrades, and upgrades meant I had more content to fill into the level and things to look forward to. So overall, just kind of making something that I took from Genshin Impact and Breath of the Wild and trying to incorporate it in more of a casual tone that worked with my game. I also was really trying to implement a climbing system into the game, and this was going to be super crucial for just traversing the levels. Originally, I wanted to go with something that was very similar to a short hike in Breath of the Wild, which was where you could basically climb any sort of terrain, and you just had a certain amount of stamina for it. And I think these systems really work out for these two games, but I slowly started to realize that this just was not going to work for my game at all. And not only was it incredibly difficult to program and very buggy, but it was just a bit too slow. And Smushi needed snappy movement that was supposed to feel a little bit more like a platformer. So instead of scrapping the climbing system altogether, I kind of implemented a hybrid approach. So what happens now is instead of you being able to climb onto a surface, you kind of jump onto it and latch onto it, and you can't move at all once you've done that. However, you can press the jump button again to basically spring forward and gain an additional jump. And this actually worked really, really well with Smushi's snappier movement. I think it also kind of helped make the gameplay a little bit more diversified because there weren't that many climbing systems that did this. It was kind of like a wall jump, but in an assisted mode because you're able to just sit there and wait and figure out the next action. So yeah, I really spent countless hours just toying with the movement for Smushi. The animations played a very big part in making movement feel satisfying, but also just tinkering away for hours and hours tweaking small values. It took a lot of iterations like everything else in the game, but it was definitely worth it in the end. So once I had the movement system feeling really solid, it was time to start building these small open worlds. And truthfully, level design was actually one of the most time-consuming parts of development. There were a handful of these smallish open worlds, and there needed to be filled with content. New collectibles, upgrades, NPCs to find. And not only that, they had to be traversed very fluid-like. I also wanted to really invoke a sense of curiosity with these levels, so the level design had to really, really complement that. Thankfully, I was able to iterate on the level design really quickly because I used Unity's terrain tools, which is just a built-in tool already. This basically allowed me to kind of just build a level and jump into it and iterate on it very, very quickly, which is exactly what I would do. I would typically start sculpting out the first area of a level and see that it doesn't really flow as well with the rest and just kind of keep iterating onwards. And honestly, the biggest help with level design, at least in my opinion, would be playtesting. So this is actually my first iteration of the first level that I spent about 2 months on, and this ended up getting completely scrapped. I thought I had a really good level going here, and then I handed it off to some playtesters, only to find out that everyone was getting lost, they felt like the level was too big, and all the areas just looked way too similar. And that's the thing about player feedback, is you really, really have to listen to it and be able to adapt to what they're saying. So like I said, I ended up scrapping that first level and decided to redo it based on the player feedback. I focused on making it much smaller, but also making all the areas within it a lot more readable. And there were a few different ways I did, like different techniques that I used to kind of achieve that effect. So first off, there's a lot of characters in the game, and I decided to emphasize more on their aesthetic and make them look really, really different. The characters in my game do not move, so they essentially acted as landmarks and helped players know that they've already been here before or they've just discovered a new place by spotting the NPC. Another way that I made level design or areas a little bit more different and more easily understandable is I emphasized environmental art and props. So a lot of the areas kind of look the same in the levels because they're all taking place in like a forest. But in order to emphasize that, I would try to use models that would specifically only be seen in this area. And I would also change up the terrain in some areas, such as here where this one beach area has mostly a sandy terrain. I also incorporated a dynamic music system into the game. So basically, each level has just one track playing over and over again, but all of the instruments are broke up into separate layers. This allowed me to basically create these different music zones. So when you would enter a new area, I would play maybe a different instrument or maybe no instrument at all to let you know you've changed into an area. For example, you walk into the beach area, you might just hear piano, guitar, and drums. And then you enter the garden area, and maybe you only hear piano. So overall, these techniques really, really help the player learn the map and not get too lost. But I also tried to diversify the maps more by adding these cave areas. These kind of helped make the levels feel bigger without me having to expand on the overworld. And the caves also had quite different level design to them. So instead of being very open and free, like in the overworld, caves were much, much smaller, and they had smaller rooms that you couldn't really progress towards unless you had finished the task in that area. Essentially, caves acted like dungeons, and they really just helped to diversify the gameplay and add some change to things without having to completely change the gameplay. So level design was honestly just a constant challenge, but it was a really fun task to take on. You basically start out with this completely blank level and sculpt it into something that becomes fully playable for players. Honestly, once you pass this off to a tester, you will find that there are a lot of flaws in your level design, and that is totally normal, and you should embrace that as much as possible. I really would have not had any good levels if I hadn't listened to what my players were saying, because like I mentioned earlier, the first level I basically heard it was complete crap. And I just had to take that and run with it. And something that also really took me by surprise with the development of this game was just how much dialogue there was. To give you some insight, there are over 40 characters to meet in this game. About 10 of them are kind of insignificant and just have a couple things to say, but the rest of them all play a very significant role in the gameplay and storyline. So they all needed their own personalities and tons of dialogue to write. In order to write this dialogue, I implemented Yarn Spinner, which is a great asset for Unity. I wanted the dialogue to be somewhat adaptive to the player depending on your progression. So some characters should say things a little bit differently depending on where you are. And Yarn Spinner is a great asset because it allows you to do conditional and branching dialogue really, really easily. And I also tried to make the writing really wholesome, funny, and just kind of relatable. Most of the characters have super quirky personalities that are either kind of serious or really, really goofy. And then for Smushi, I decided to make him not really a silent main character. He talks quite a lot. And his personality is a lot more normal. So he will kind of react the same way that we would react to these conversations. And I think that made Smushi and the player just have a stronger bond, which was really, really important for the storyline. Because the whole story is about Smushi being lost in the forest, trying to find his way back home. And not only did I want the player to be motivated through the gameplay, but I also wanted them to be motivated through the storyline as well, and really connect with the main player to feel like they wanted to finish the game. And when creating different personalities for characters, I tried to just draw inspirations from different characters from other media, like cartoon shows or video games, or even just people I knew in real life. Then I would basically take those personalities and really, really emphasize them. And this ties in a lot, again, with my inspiration from Adventure Time. I would also not really plan out any of the dialogue, to be honest with you. It was just kind of there on the spot. Usually I would sculpt out a character, and then I would kind of figure out a personality based on inspirations, the look of the character, and also their objective in the world as well. And oftentimes I would write whole dialogue scripts out and just completely scrap them. And it's just kind of one of those things that you have to keep going at over and over again until it feels right. And there was also a really tricky balance to find with these characters. The levels aren't that big. The game is just not that big in general. It's a fairly short game that you can beat in 1 or 2 sittings. And I didn't want the player to just be talking to NPCs the whole time, because a huge aspect of the gameplay is being adventurous. So I had to really plan out where NPCs were going to be placed to kind of let there be a good pacing between dialogue and then exploring again. So once I felt like the game was in a pretty presentable state, I started marketing the game online. I think the marketing strategies have changed quite a lot now, but for me, I actually started marketing pretty early on, once I had a solid art style. And just to make it very clear, marketing is synonymous to social media. So you have got to post your work if you want people to see it. And what you end up posting and how often you do that is going to really, really matter. It's going to make it count. So if you look here on the left, this is the first post I ever did. This was a month into development, which is pretty early on. But I basically knew that once I had the main character established, I was going to start showing it off. The main character had to be established because the gameplay is built around this character. Initially, I focused on Twitter and Reddit, which are kind of dying down now, especially Reddit. But at the time, they were doing really well. And to be clear, I didn't really have any posts go very viral, but I did see a consistent and steady growth happen. And that's really, really crucial to pay attention to. You don't need to be looking for viral hits, but just look for consistent growth in your posts. Once I had a Steam page going, I made the transition over to mostly TikTok and Instagram, which I found a lot more success in, but they're very up and down. If you'll notice here, I made one video go viral, and then the next day, the other one just kind of flopped compared to it. I did find that Instagram was a lot more consistent, but honestly, these algorithms are changing all the time, and it could be different to this day. And for a while there, I was kind of just chasing views to get my Steam wishlist up. And this is a really bad habit. At one point, I was kind of just making content that I thought would make it for a good video, and it ended up never really being worth it. ultimately I found that it was better to just kind of develop the game and get really creative with how you show off that process and what else you can show off within the game, not trying to make content for videos. And to kind of give you an idea of just like how that worked out for me, I didn't really hit my, I guess, viral consistent template until after my game came out. And this is kind of an example of what that looked like. So that kind of format ended up doing really, really well for me, hitting 1.8 million views on Instagram. And I didn't have to make anything different. All I had to do was just tweak values in the game. And that's kind of just about getting creative with what you already have and what you're working on. And again, not really trying to make content for videos. I also really want to emphasize having a Discord server being really, really important when you're trying to market your game. Social media was a great way to gain wish lists and just gain attention, but creating a small but dedicated fan base on Discord ended up being really, really crucial for me. But you do have to keep it very active. For me, I would host game nights, art contests, things like that, even just custom or private updates about the game that I wouldn't post online. And this kept the Discord alive and honestly thriving. And I think at the peak we had like 2,000 members. And on the day of release, my Discord ended up being one of the biggest helps that I could have had. Basically, when you release a game on Steam, it's crucial to hit the new and trending tab. And in order to do that, you have to have at least 10 reviews, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually really, really difficult to hit. And I made this very clear to my Discord server, who was super supportive of my work. So on the day of release, a handful of them had already got the game, and they already knew to play it for like 30 minutes and then leave a review and then just get back to it. This helped me go into the new and trending tab, and from there, Steam will pick up the game and push it to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of players. So overall, I really think the best marketing strategy for a game is to kind of just be yourself. I think that's what really makes us as indie developers a lot more different from AAA studios and games like that. Being indie just kind of allows you to be closer to your community and just get more on a personal level with them, which they really do enjoy. And yeah, just keep on posting as much as possible. For me, I was trying to do at least one thing a week on Twitter and 1 to 2 videos on Instagram and TikTok. It does take a lot of time out of your day, but it's absolutely essential if you're trying to market your game online and make a living off of it. And thanks to all this growth from social media, it kind of caught the eye of some publishers, which I really wasn't expecting. Initially, I wanted to make the game all on my own, just kind of try to do the self-publishing route. But I slowly started to realize that that was just going to be too much for someone who has no experience, such as myself. I knew I needed help hiring my musician, Phil Positive. I also really wanted to get the game on the Nintendo Switch, which is not something that a small-time dev can just get easily. Nintendo is really difficult to get a hold of, and they don't just hand out dev kits. I also needed help doing QA. Up until this point, I was playtesting and doing small playtest sessions with players, but that was really just to get feedback on the game, not really to find bugs. And I also wanted to get help with localization and get the game in as many languages as possible. Now, truthfully, I didn't do any pitching to publishers. They kind of just all came to me. They saw me consistently posting online, and despite nothing going super viral, they saw a lot of potential into it. So I had a couple calls with these publishers. And they kind of, honestly, I can't really say much because of all the NDAs. I can't really go over the numbers. But most of the talks were the same. They basically asked me how much money did I need, what was my timeline, when would they be able to try out a build, because most of them reached out to me before I even had anything playable yet, and just what were my expectations with the game overall. One thing I was always very cautious about was letting them know how much money I need for this game. Some of them even offered to pay me a salary, and I mean, they were going to give me like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I just realized, that's all money that they're going to have to recoup in the end. So I basically always asked for the bare minimum. What I needed to cover my musician, Nintendo Switch porting, localization, all that. Just the bare minimum. I don't need to be paid anything. And I would advise doing the same too if you're in a similar situation. Don't take money that you don't need. And I could quickly start to realize which of these publishers were just not ideal because their deals seemed very, very unfair. There was one publisher that really, really stood out though. They couldn't really talk to me much more because they needed to try a build of the game. But that publisher was Moon Eye Indies. They were actually game developers themselves, well known for their game Lost Ember. So when I talked to them, I felt like I was talking to fellow game developers, and not just a bunch of businessmen that wanted to kind of make money off of my work. So the team at Moon Eye would eventually go on to play a very, very rough build of that first level that I mentioned got completely scrapped. But they still really enjoyed it and saw a lot of potential into the game. There was actually another well-known publisher that was also very interested, and ultimately I had to come down to either Moon Eye Indies or them. And as you could probably guess, I chose Moon Eye Indies, which ended up being a really good decision. They basically managed to do everything I needed them to do, which was pay for my musician, switch porting, localization, QA. But not only that, they also got me into some really cool in-person events that I wasn't expecting, like Day of the Devs and PAX East. And personally, I didn't really notice much of a wish list spike going into these things, but I still think they're really, really good to go to because you kind of get to have that in-person experience with players, and you also get to market and network yourself with other developers, which was just really, really fun overall. And Moon Eye Studios also really helped me advertise the game as well. They did a lot of paid ads, but I just want to make it known that I also continue to market all on my own as well, which I feel like is probably still the main driving factor towards the wish lists. So finding the right publisher can honestly be really, really difficult. If you are looking for a publisher for your game, you just have to be ready to build a pitch deck and start sending it out to as many people as you want. Just be very cautious going into these meetings because there are a ton of publishers out there. A lot of them have some pretty crazy revenue shares to throw at you. And just be careful with how much money you're asking for. Don't take too much because remember, what you ask for is what they'll end up taking once the game comes out. And after all those ups and downs of developing the game, marketing it, working with a publisher, it was finally time to release Smushi Come Home. So it took me about 2 years to basically get the game, or make the game, and just keep in mind I was basically working on this thing full time. And as we got closer to release, we had to figure out a release date, which is something that not a lot of game developers talk about because it's incredibly difficult to even understand. And I think even to this day, we kind of just got lucky finding the right date. But we did try to analyze it as much as possible. We basically looked at what type of games were being released towards our ideal release date. And then we started honing it down more towards what games in our genre are being released, because those are the real competitors. You don't really have to worry about GTA 6 releasing on the day of your game. Or maybe not GTA 6, don't do that. But just other bigger titles, you don't have to worry about it if it's not the same genre. Steam has a massive player base. You would be very surprised to know that, trust me, like people are going to be looking at your game. So ultimately, we decided to look at the month of June. It just seemed like a really good time because there wasn't a lot of competition, not a lot of cozy games coming out. And there was also a Wholesome Games Direct happening in June. For those that don't know what Wholesome Games is, they're basically just a small group of people that put on these Wholesome Directs, which are really, really big indie game directs specific for cozy games. And we basically got into it because we kind of had some connections, thanks to my publishers. What we could have honestly done was announce a release date and then drop the game during the Wholesome Direct, but we decided to do something way riskier and explosive. So we actually never released a release date for our game. We ended up shadow dropping it live during the event. And this is typically something you don't want to do, because if you release a release date for your game, it allows you to reach the the popular upcoming game tab on Steam. And this is really important. When you get on this tab, you're getting thousands and thousands of wish lists a day because you're getting front page exposure. We basically kind of risked this because we weren't going to have that by not having a release date. So we had to fully rely on our wish lists, which was around 50,000 by the time we released the game, my social media, my Discord server, and we were really riding on how successful this Wholesome Games Direct was going to be. So about a week before the Wholesome Direct, I just went really crazy with the marketing. Every single day, I would post a countdown post, and a lot of them actually ended up doing really, really well. And it generated a ton of short-term hype. It's really important to note that hype about your game is going to die down. So you kind of want to play your best hand closer to release. That way you can create a really, really huge wave of momentum carrying into the big day. And for me, that day eventually came. About halfway through the Wholesome Direct of 2023, my section popped up where I basically showed off the trailer of the game, and right at the end, it announced that we released the game right now on Steam and Nintendo Switch. And it turned out to work out really, really well. Within the first 6 days, we sold 10,000 copies across Steam and Nintendo Switch. And about a month later, we reached the overwhelmingly positive score on Steam, which requires 500 Steam reviews and at least a 95% positive rating. So yeah, overall the game really, really exceeded my expectations and did super well. And one metric I thought that was really interesting is the Steam page visits. This is basically unique page loads for your Steam page. And I'm going to kind of break down this metric a little bit to make it a little more easier to understand. So the store traffic represents basically people clicking on the game directly from the Steam page. This does not include people typing your game out in the search bar. That would actually be in the external traffic. So that's people typing out your game in the search bar in Steam, clicking on it, or people just accessing the Steam page through other websites, like a Twitter link or an Instagram link, anything like that. So within the first week, we had mostly organic Steam growth. From the front page, being on the new and trending tab is insane. You want to be on there, trust me. All of those numbers are basically coming from that. And then we had about 11,000 unique loads from external traffic. And that's basically just from, mostly our announcement that we posted, going crazy with social media online, telling everyone to go check out the game. Here's the link. One thing that's really interesting to note, though, is by the first month, the store traffic and external traffic were about 50-50. And from what I've studied, that's pretty abnormal. Usually it's mostly store traffic, which was already pretty huge at about 700,000 unique clicks, or unique page loads. But then if you look at the external traffic, it was another 700,000. And this is primarily because I continued to market the game so heavily after it came out. And I think a lot of developers forget to do that. It is so crucial that if you have something going well, you have to continue to run with it. Don't just be like, oh, all right, I made it, like I'm done. I mean, it works for some games, but for me, I just had to keep shouting out into the void and saying, my game's out, my game's out. And that's kind of when I hit that viral trend on Instagram. It was like months after my game came out, and it just kept growing and growing more and more. And this hype really didn't die down. It allowed me to do a free content update for the game. Then we had a physical release with super rare games. We even had some plushies and even a vinyl, which I thought was really, really cool. And the content update alone was actually really, really big. And not only was it really just cool to be able to make one of these, but it had an explosion of sales the day we released it because it's totally free. We did it on the anniversary of the game, so a year later. And people just really loved that there was more bonus content. Even today, I still see it in the reviews of people mentioning how they just really appreciated that there's an extra level and there's more to do. And so doing this content update really helped with the just overall time that the game had out there. And yeah, as of recently, the game has sold over 100,000 copies across Steam and Nintendo Switch, which just really blows my mind, honestly. I was not expecting it to do this well. But yeah, I'm really grateful for all the success. There's definitely a lot that I learned from it. I think a big part of the success was just that I was able to make it smaller and something beatable that everyone could play. I still hear a lot of people tell me that this is the first game they ever beat, or the first game they ever 100%ed, because it's totally doable. And I really just, without even realizing it, I kind of capitalized on a genre that wasn't that well known at the time, which was cozy games. It's definitely starting to pick up now, but it's still a great genre to get into. I highly recommend it if you guys do enjoy cozy games yourself, because they're just a lot less stressful to make. Not that this game wasn't the most stressful thing I ever did in my whole life, but it has its ways. And so yeah, that does about it. So yeah, thanks for listening. Yeah, thank you.